Greetings. We want to go through a brief tutorial on using objects in Java today. What are our objectives? Well, we want to understand how to use objects. We're going to create our objects. We want to be able to manipulate them. And then we want to be able to ask our objects for things that they know. Java is an object-oriented language. The whole essence of Java is to be able to create and use objects. What are objects? Well, objects are actually instances of some class of objects. Suppose we have a class named student. We might have a specific student, which would become an instance or a particular student in our code that we want to keep track of. Objects have state and they have behavior. State is what an object knows. For a student could be his name, GPA, etc. And objects can have behavior. Behavior is what they can do, what we can ask of the objects. In order to write object-oriented code, we essentially have to know how to use these objects. For now, we're going to defer on how we create those classes, the templates, for a bit. For this tutorial, we're going to assume that we have some class already written named student. I said objects have state. What is that? It's the data that's unique for each object. Every student in a classroom has their own name, their own ID, their own GPA, their own class list, etc. For our students, we're going to have names, IDs, credit hours attempted, grade points earned, GPAs, etc. A user of an object, that means somebody writing the code, will often have to set the state, modify the state, and get the state from the object. The essential point here is that we want the object to remember its information and not the person having to use it. Objects also have behavior. Objects have behavior. This is what the object can do or what it does for the user. For today's tutorial, we're going to be users of objects, so we want to be able to use their objects. The way we're going to do that is to be able to call the objects methods. Objects have methods. In other languages, they might be called functions or procedures or whatever. In Java, we're going to call them methods. Our student objects might have a method that we can set the name, get the name, add a grade for a class, get the GPA, etc. That's the behavior. That's how we're going to access our objects. In order to access our object, first thing we have to do is create an object. Usually in this class we'll be creating and manipulating objects in a class with a main method. That's going to be our driver. How do we make objects? Well, we do that by using the new operator and calling something we're going to call a constructor. In order to make a new student object, we might say new student, and maybe, depending on the class definition, pass it a parameter. In this case, we're going to pass a parameter of a student name. So we might say student in our Java code, student stu equals new student, in parentheses Fred. The thing in parentheses are going to be what we pass to the constructor. This is going to be similar to what we do in methods. The values that we pass to a method or to a constructor are called the parameter values. So that statement right there will pass a parameter with a value of Fred to the student constructor. The constructor always has the name equal to the class name. And what's the purpose? It's the purpose so that that object can set the name of the student to Fred, or whatever you choose. So now the object can remember that this student has the name Fred. And then the final thing that this line of code does is the right-hand side of the assignment statement creates the object. The left-hand side creates an object reference, and that's how we're going to remember or access our object. So the left-hand side creates a object reference named stu of type student, and that assignment statement will put a pointer in the variable stu that points to that student that we just created. Now, we can create classes like student and use them, but there's also thousands of classes in the Java API, and that's located at the Sun website for Java, and it just lists the classes that we can use and we can create in our programs. For an example, there's a class in the Java API of rectangle. A rectangle can be created with the new operator, just like student, new rectangular, and this one takes 4 parameters: an x, a y, a width, and a height. In this case, we created a rectangle, x and y of 10 and 20, width of 100, and height of 200. Now, we've called our constructor to create the object. Now we have to call the methods. Methods are how we're going to talk to our object, so these are really critical. Sometimes we have to pass to the method some values. They're called parameters. Some methods don't require anything to be passed to it. Some methods return a value after doing what it does, and some don't. Here's a couple of examples. Once we've made a student object and we have a reference variable named stu, we can say object name dot method name, and then if there's any parameters to be passed, put the values inside of the parentheses. That value can be a literal, like we're doing here, or it could be a variable name. stu.setName, in parentheses, Fred Jones, passes Fred Jones to the setName method to allow the object to update its copy, its memory of the name to Fred Jones. It returns nothing, so we would typically put a call to a method that returns nothing or void without using any assignment statement. Here's another one. Now we want to ask the object stu, the object reference stu, what's your name? So we call getName. We don't pass it anything. Notice there's nothing in the parentheses, but we still need the parentheses. And it is going to return the name to us. We then assign this to a string variable named name. That's what is happening on the left-hand side of the assignment statement. Whenever we want to know something about the state of our object, we ask the object by calling its methods. In this case, we're asking stu. It's always going to be our object reference or object name dot method name. Now, we're going to try this out using a demo in Eclipse. So you can open up Eclipse, and what we want to do is we want to create and manipulate a student object. We want to do a few things. We want to create an object with a name, Mary Mary. Then we immediately want to revise her name to Mary Jones because we input that incorrectly. And then we want to tell the student class that Mary has taken 3 classes. She got a 4-credit A, a 3-credit B, and a 1-credit D. Then we want to ask the object for her name. We should know it, but we always want to ask the object for the value that it knows, and for the GPA. So let's download a student class and make note of this. We don't have to look into the student class too much, but we have, for the student class, a constructor that takes a string name. It has some methods, setName, and we have to pass it a name, a getName method that returns a string, an addGrade. This one's a little more complicated. For each call to add grade, we have to tell it how many credit hours were taken and how many points did they get for that. In this case, if we're going to use 4 points for an A, 3 for a B, etc. The student class will then tally that, will add that to its version of the total number of semester hours and the total grade points that's been earned by this student. And finally, we're going to make a call to get GPA to find out Mary's grade point average. So let's download the student class, open up Eclipse, create a Java project, and try this out. Thanks.